Hi everyone, Dom Famularo back here again at the Artist Series at a Distance. This for me is so exciting because I get to step into the lives of these great musically talented legends. And I have one that is with me right now, coming from Texas. Would you please everybody welcome Betty Buckley. Betty, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Dom. It's a pleasure.
Betty, you are, when we say a multi-award winning actress and singer, I mean, it really is multi-award winning. I was counting over when I saw 15, 16 awards and nominations and 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards. This is more than anyone I've ever sat down. I just so you know, Betty, I'm a little nervous.
You're so nice to say that. But, I was talking to you before we started our interview, and I honestly think it's just about endurance. If you hang out long enough, then people start thinking, oh yeah, we could give her an award. That would be nice.
Well, as humble as that might sound, in order to get an award, even if it's due in the course of time, there has to be earned results in the action of performance, which you clearly have done in your lifetime and continue to do, which is really, really what I want to capture in this interview.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the beginning now. So, were you singing as a child? Was that a part of your family atmosphere when you were growing up?
Yeah, my dad played the guitar by ear, and we had a funky old piano in the garage too. My dad was from South Dakota. My grandfather was a real cowboy in the Old West and drove cattle. My grandmother, Myrtle Buckley, she drove the chuck wagon for the cattle drive. So, and then on my mother's side of the family, her grandfather, my great-grandfather, was the town traveling doctor, and her grandmother was the town music teacher. So my mother grew up as a singer-dancer. My aunt, her older sister, was a dancer, a professional dancer, and then opened a dance school later on. I came from this kind of really strong group of women. My grandmother, Mary Diltz, and my aunt, Mary Ruth, and my mother. And they were all performers, my aunt and my mother. When I was born, my father, interestingly enough, and it's interesting to me because later he was in direct opposition to my being an actress-singer, but he taught me to sing these old South Dakota folk songs. Then I sang in the junior choir at the Methodist Church. I studied dance with my aunt from the time I was 3. And I loved performing. I loved my shiny tap shoes with glitter and stuff. And I loved the recitals every year, where we performed our numbers. And so from age 3, I was a performer. And when I was 11, my mother took me to see my first musical theater show at our regional theater, Casa Mañana. And I had what I realized as an adult was an epiphany. It was with the original Bob Fosse choreography of Pajama Game. And there's a classic Bob Fosse number with a girl and 2 guys who sing and dance to a song called Steam Heat. And I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I was just like, what is that? I'm going to be doing that for the rest of my life, was this like epiphany. And I remember the moment, I remember where I was sitting. And then I came back from our junior high, came back from school one day and told my mother I wanted to learn Steam Heat for the junior high talent show. And she was like, well, these guys have just decided to settle in Fort Worth and open a new dance school, so let me take you to them and see if they can teach it to you. I learned Steam Heat, and I did it in the junior high talent show, and it was my first experience of doing the 11 o'clock number. They put me on right before the senior girls can line. And it was that moment where I finished the number and everybody in the audience was like in that kind of suspended, breathless silence. And then they all went, no. And that was the beginning. And, that's really, over the years, has become my specialty in the musical theater. It's called the 11 o'clock number, which is the kind of wrap-up number for the show that conveys the show's philosophy and the heart of what the show's about. And like Memory from Cats is an 11 o'clock number. And so from there, my mother kind of was like, and had me performing. And I studied with these guys that had directed and danced in that show and were acolytes of Bob Fosse. They had worked for him and done a number of shows and then decided to settle in Fort Worth to my good fortune, I became their student all through junior high school, college. And they were just great. They taught me so much about performance. And they also taught me there was a purpose for girls with big voices, which I didn't have to always blend in, So by the time I was 15, I made my professional debut at that same theater, Casa Manana, in a musical called Gypsy. I played Dainty June in that. And then I danced in West Side Story. And then every summer from then on, I did a show at Casa Manana. So I had a lot of performing experience by the time I graduated college. When I was 21, I moved to New York at the behest of this agent who later became a big Broadway producer. His name was Roger Hess, and he remains a very good friend to this day. And he got me to come to New York against my father's wishes. And, my mother was, of course, very enthusiastic about it. And I got my first big Broadway show my first day in New York City, which was 1776, the musical, and I debuted the role of Martha Jefferson.
So just go back a while. Now, I want to capture this here because this is very intense. What do you think was that moment? What was so important about that moment with Steamed Heat that captured you, that brought you to this stage?
Well, Bob Fosse was a real innovator in the musical theater. He was a stylist. I just remember watching it and being so fascinated by it. And I remember this energy force that I literally had this experience of this energy force going up through the top of my head, over my head, and looking back at me and saying, that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And I was like, well, what is that? And then I learned that was musical theater. And my mother had this extensive collection of Broadway cast albums, which I'm so grateful that I was exposed to all these classic American, musical shows. So I knew all of those. I knew that wonderful songbook. And she also had a collection of great lady singers that I studied religiously. And that's really how I learned to sing. I mimicked.
Put all that time into literally studying the greats. That really is probably where you pulled this passion to a high level.
Well, I could imitate them. And I thought that was fun, like the Judy Garland at Carnegie Hall album, which is just a classic. And then I studied the great lady jazz singers too, like Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. Oh, I loved echo. Our house was on the edge of West Fort Worth, Texas, and I loved resonant spaces. I would bike around and I would find the culverts under the highways and I would sing in the culverts, I would find church spaces, and I would go in when no one was there and sing and love the resonance, the echo pockets. And our shower at the end of the hall, that my brothers and I shared, had a really good reverb pocket. And so I love the sound of echo in pockets of sound. And to this day, when I'm on stage and I'm working with my sound man, I'm like, where's the pocket? And if I can't hear the pocket, I can't sing as well. I'd always like the Antonio Carlos Jobim music and Brazil 66. It just seemed like, there's this place. And then I loved the Peter Gunn theme, on television. And that was amazing. And I envisioned this world. Like, my parents took me to see the Ice Capades when I was 8. I saw this duet of these skaters dancing to Rhapsody in Blue. And I was like, what's that? Oh, my God. In the Peter Gunn show, everybody had a perfect apartment with all glass, surround windows and, all perfect views of the city. And I thought everyone in New York lived like that. So I was kind of surprised when I moved to New York at 21. It was like, oh, that's not what every apartment looks like, When I was 8 and I saw Rhapsody in Blue, I thought, okay. And because of the Peter Gunn show, that da dum da da ba da da dee da ba ba da da dee da ba dee da dee dum ba dee dum. And we had this great babysitter named Peggy Lee, which was great. She was named Peggy Lee, right? And my brothers and I would wait till the end of the Peter Gunn show, and she was this really cool teenage girl, and she would jump up, and she had long blonde hair, and she would throw her hair over her head and dance all around our living room to the Peter Gunn theme. And I was like, this is so great. I'm moving to New York City. I know that's where I belong. I just felt like that was my calling. I needed to go to New York City.
Well, New York City for sure was a hub to come to. You're 21 years old. What was it like moving to New York and taking that level of a commitment?
Well, it was a bit of a shock. I had never been on my own before, and while I could sing and I could dance, and I was an experienced performer, and I felt pretty confident in those ways. I didn't have any life skills, and certainly not about living alone, and that was scary, and so and lonely, really, really weird, and so I went through some stuff figuring all that out in my earliest days. But I did 1776. We went on the road promptly to New Haven. We opened in New Haven, then we went to Washington, D.C. and opened, and then we came in and we were like the big hit that spring of 1969. And I was in the show 7 months, and then I got the female lead in Promises, Promises, and went away for a year. It was a blessing because I was so far away in London that I was away from the pressure that I felt from my family, and most especially my father, who didn't want me to be in show business. And that was this huge issue in my life. I mean, it's taken me years and years and years of therapy with really great therapists and spiritual programs to overcome the obstacles. I was never on my own team because my father wasn't, and it was hard to give myself permission, even though I knew I was going to go to New York City, and I knew that I was going to sing on Broadway.
So you actually envisioned your sound and what you wanted to sound like at a young age. You pretty much had that.
I didn't know the specifics of what that was. I just knew what it felt like, And then I was a great follower of Keith Jarrett in concert. I would go to all these solo concerts. I had always these amazing visions and clarity about my life path through Keith Jarrett, the experience of his music. And I remember one time I was in one of his concerts at Alice Tully Hall, and I saw who I would again grow to be as a concert artist and who my band was. And I saw the whole thing, and I was like, oh, how do I find these guys? And then I set on a quest to find them by calling, some of the best musicians that I knew and asking for their introductions to some great players. I didn't know what the specific song was that I was singing with these guys. I just knew what it felt like. So it was kind of that.
So you get into New York. Were you doing auditions? Were you contacting people? Did you have management? How did you make the connection for all these shows?
Well, I'd been signed by this agency when I was a junior in college because I was on that TV show. And I never had to search for an agent until I was dropped by my agency when I was like in my early 40s. And then I had to go find a new agent at that point, which was like really a raw experience. It wasn't fun. And because a lot of these people that I'd grown up with in the business, had this sadistic enjoyment of saying no to me because I was like there needing representation. And that was a real big education. Then I finally connected with these young agents who were terrific and started the flow of my work started again, which had been kind of truncated by this like power broker agent who, show business is so weird. It's beyond weird, Dom. I don't know if you know that, but it's like...
I've been doing it. I am well aware of
weird.
And we have to learn how to kind of,
navigate.
Navigate through this weirdness.
Yeah, I call it navigating your way through the landmines of show business, but I was always, I don't know, it's odd to say, I'm a meditator, and I, I'm a committed meditator and live a life on a spiritual path, but it feels like my career is kind of divinely guided. And so many of the opportunities that have come to me have come because of the generosity of really incredible people that have opened doors for me.
Well, that generosity, I believe, has to be inspired for people to see value and talent and ability that you obviously have. They saw that in you.
Yeah, and they reflected it back to me, and with times that I didn't know about it myself. Yeah. So, I had this calling, one can say, and I had a yearning to follow that. I had a passion, a great love for musical theater, for music itself, and for being a storyteller, but then finding that path. Yeah, that's the whole thing. And being ready for the next opportunity. It's like, it's a lot of work, but it's fun.
So what was it like doing these auditions? How much preparation did you have? Were you
Yeah.
nervous? What was that all about? Those are very intense.
Yeah, auditions are hard. They were scary. And, normally you do auditions for some shows with the rehearsal pianist, but for the most part, I would always take my own pianist. I would pay for the pianist to go with me to rehearse with my own piano player and take him with me to the audition. In my mid-20s, after I got back from London, I did a series. I was in this show, Pippin, for a really long time on Broadway. And I needed to be in the show because I wasn't being paid very much money. And I needed to pay for my acting classes and for my therapy. And I was working really hard in my therapy. And I was working really hard in my acting classes. And I had this, again, a vision of becoming this really fine, naturalistic, realistic actress who could bring truthful work to the musical theater. Because the musical theater as a style, it used to be called the musical comedy. So a lot of the American classic shows were musical comedies. And then they had the leads in the show, the principals, and then they would have the singing chorus and the dancing chorus and and so everybody's job was very specific. Now, the musical, it's no longer the musical comedy, it's the musical theater, and you have to be good at singing, acting, dance, the whole thing. So I studied to become a very realistic actress. So I was in Pippin a long time to pay for that. And then out of Pippin, I got my first film, which was Carrie. From Carrie, I was cast in a TV show called Eight is Enough. And I didn't think too much about that, taking that job. I was just like, oh, that's more money than I've ever heard about per week, or per episode or whatever it was. But once I got out there and in that factory circumstance, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And plus our producers were not cool guys. They were very uncool guys and cruel. That 4 years on that TV show was like, I feel like it was a big old school in big business, show business. And when I got out of that show, that same year, I got the film Tender Mercies, which starred Robert Duvall, a role that was like this singing country western star who was a massive alcoholic. And it was just the kind of part I'd been training for. So that was like this great gift, to play that part. And then I got Grisabella in Cats, which was another big opportunity to use my skills.
On the business side, trying to manage all this here. I mean, you're being paid, you've got to pay rent and what you're doing. How did you balance the business side? Were there mistakes made that you regret big time now, or how'd that all work out?
I can't say that I regret anything. I certainly learned some painful lessons the hard way, let me put it that way. I was never very good at that management of thing. Again, that was one of the life skills that wasn't taught to me. It's scary out there. Did you ever see this movie called Babe?
Yeah.
It's about the pig that wants to be a herd pig, and the people are like, no, pigs can't be herd dogs. And he grew up with border collies that are herd dogs and stuff. So in that movie, the movie is written by and directed by a man who's went to the same meditation center where I went, and it's genius. It's a genius film, and there are these three mice that keep appearing in the film, and they're over in the corner of the screen in the slogans, and they have little slogans called "The Way Things Are," and they would say "The way things are" in their mice voices, and that so the scene would play out with Babe and the animals or the people and whatever was going on, and then the mice would appear and say and sum up what that lesson was for that scene. And it was called the Way Things Are. And I always tell my students that they have to watch that film because the mice and the slogans about the way things are represent the minefields of life or show business. If you learn a philosophy based on truth, right, and you learn to meditate and keep your mind and your emotions and you practice remembering the truth of the connection of all humanity and all life, right? But then you have to remember, too, the way things are culturally, even though the way things are includes a lot of lies. And so those lies are the minefields that you have to navigate through. And the tools of meditation help you do that. but without a doubt, along the way, there are angels. So that's it.
This is great how your skills of education and teaching. Talk about the 40 years that you have been a teacher and of scene study and song interpretation. All the years you've been doing that, you really seem to be an excellent educator and a guiding force.
Well, I really enjoy it because when I was younger, I used to I told you I didn't have a lot of life skills when I got to New York City. And so I went through a lot of very painful experiences to teach me the hard way. So I decided that all the great things I know how to do in performance and everything I've learned about living on this planet in a respectful communication with other beings, all other beings, right? That practice I've learned from great teachers, and I'm beholden. Probably, I don't have an original thought in my head. Probably everything I think or feel or do is because they taught me to do that. So and I have these amazing tools because of these teachers. So, and the tools are everything, and they're responsible for the really beautiful opportunities and good work that I've been called to do. So I feel like it's my duty, it's my responsibility to pass those on. And they're meditative tools and a universal meditative philosophy. And so I've been teaching actually now probably over 47 years, or no, I guess about little over 45. It's that gratitude that makes me teach.
Well, that is a very powerful word, gratitude, because that is something which allows us to continue to be a student.
I want to save myself and other people as much pain as possible. I think it's, what we put ourselves through is unfortunate and unnecessary in so many cases, and sometimes it's necessary in order to make us grow,
Well, very well said. But, you have recorded many CDs, over 18 CDs. You have, won, as I said, nominations and Tonys and, Lifetime Achievement Awards. I mean, you really have earned the respect in this industry. With that, in closing, what would you say to this next generation, this young generation that's coming up that has that sparkle in their eyes, and you look at them and you see that same passion and that same drive that you had? What kind of a guidance would you give them today?
Well, a lot of young artists that I've been blessed to teach and work with over the years, they are under the impression that they need to be like everybody else. And so in a lot of these really excellent musical theater schools and stuff, there's a notion of you've got to do it as it was done, and so it's a real cookie cutter thing. And some of the greatest casting people in the business that have shared with me that it's hard to find unique individuals in the new, as the younger artists come up. And so I try to teach people that come to my class a methodology and a process whereby they can discover themselves in their material, because there will never be another Dom, there will never be another anyone else. And that's what's so incredibly, perfectly beautiful about life in the physical universe on this planet, is everyone is so uniquely and remarkably an individual. And we're here, and if you're called to sing, if you're called to perform, if you're called to be one of the music makers, I think that calling is along the lines of being one of the healers on the planet. Like, that's our job. That's how the whole thing started, was, theater started with the pagan religions, where the high priests and priestesses put on pageants for the community to explain birth and death and dying and astrology and harvest and all that stuff. And then the balladeers were those people that kind of went from village to village to sing the news, because that was the only news we had. And then the Greeks, started writing down the rules of theater to help people do it and explain, to the audience, to create a mirror, to educate, to enlighten, lift, and entertain, to help people know who we are as human beings and what that connection's all about. And that remains the purpose of theater or live music and concert or dance, or, it's art, is to help people remember the essence of who we are and our connection to all other humanity and all other life on the planet. I think that's a very high calling. So then it becomes, if you have those talents, I mean, talent used to be a word for money, right? And money was like a means of exchange. So a talent was a means of exchange, and people took the talented people express their talents as a means of making a living, and then people enjoyed that talent, would contribute to their survival. And so but it's like, if you're just going to be like everybody else, why? So find who you are in the material and give yourself the time to do that, and build a relationship with a song or with a character the way you would build a relationship with another human being. You need to fall in love with them. And to fall in love with them, you need to take time, right? And be gentle. And, I try to teach that process, but not everyone has patience. But to me, that process is what it's all about. That's what's fun.
Well, the journey, for sure, discovering oneself, if we're lucky, will take a lifetime.
Exactly. And so don't be worried about show business if it doesn't catch up to you till later. It's like you have all the time to grow.
And when it happens, that is when it is supposed to happen.
Yeah. And so like in my career, I've been lucky that I got to work when I wasn't as good as I've been, that it took me years and years and years to learn to be. And I'm lucky I was in all kinds of, blessed to be in all these work situations that helped me grow. But somehow I knew, just like I knew that I would be a Broadway singer, storyteller, actress person, I knew that my best work would be in my later years. I knew that it wasn't about being an upstart. It was about growing and, becoming a better and better human being, that being the goal.
Well, that is a wonderful goal. As opposed to a goal which focuses on money, you are focusing on personal growth and quality of life. That really is a great message.
Yeah, I don't mind money either, Dom. But I also think it's about flexibility. I tell my students that too, that, you have to know how to act as well as you know how to sing, as, well as you know how to perform. And you just have to keep learning skills. Right now, I wrote a story right as the pandemic started, and I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a song, and my collaborator, Christian Jacob, who's this brilliant French composer that scored Clint Eastwood's movies, and he's, multi-Grammy nominated. I'm really blessed to work with him. So I gave it to him. I said, I want to do this piece. And he's like, well, no, you have to come, no, that's not a song. And I'm like, okay. So I worked really hard to try to compress it. And it wouldn't compress anymore. And he wasn't that interested. And so finally I heard this piece of music at one of my favorite restaurants before the pandemic hit. And I read my story to the music and I sent it to him. I said, it's like this. And he's like, uh-huh. And he still is kind of dismissing it. And so the pandemic started. And in April, I reached out to him and I was like, listen, I want you to score this story like you score a movie. And I mean it. And so he sent me several motifs. And I was like, no. And so we finally agreed on this beautiful motif he wrote. I mean, it's gorgeous. And then he recorded his part and the bass player recorded his part in their living rooms. And then my friend, Jamie Haddad, who's a brilliant percussionist, he recorded his part in this funky studio in Cleveland. And I recorded my part in this funky studio in Fort Worth. We sent all the tracks to this brilliant engineer that's, mixed my last 6 albums, I guess, that I met through T-Bone Burnett, the genius T-Bone. And this engineer, Jason Wormer, is just incredible. He mixed this beautiful track, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. And then I'm like, where do I release this? And I didn't know. And so in June, when we finished it, I was like, oh, it's an animated short film. And so since July of last year, I've been on this quest to find my animators and my team. And I found them in December. And then my wonderful assistant, Kathy, I needed to raise the money. Once I got the budget, I was like, okay, I know I can get the money for this. So we connected with some old friends who have become independent producers in Austin, Texas. They love the story and the piece, and they're financing the whole thing. And so we've been working on this animated short film, which I've never done before, and it's such a kick. It's just a blast. It's really cool. And so I'm really excited about that. And boy, talk about learning. I'm like, this is fun, but oh man, I'm learning so much. So it's really
you are on some learning curve for sure. That is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And so I tell my students, you got to be flexible, be ready, right? And be flexible and tell your stories and just keep going, right? You don't have to like finalize the form in your head. Just keep listening to your heart and keep expressing yourself and your creativity. So
that is absolutely fantastic advice. And I must tell you something, Betty. The fact that we have an original Betty Buckley in our presence that I've enjoyed, it has been absolutely fantastic to experience not only this interview, but all the great music and the talent and the singing and your wonderful, just performances on stage have always been fantastic. So we thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, for your effort. Stay well and stay enthusiastic and stay as involved as you are.
Thank you, Dom. It's a pleasure speaking with you. I thank you.
Dom Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel. We'll see you real soon.